Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to today's meeting of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to begin with the usual preliminary issues as to the conduct of the meeting. Today's meeting is technically hybrid, but we have nobody joining us online anyway. But regardless of that, could you please ensure that you switch your microphone on when you're speaking in the chamber so that your contribution is picked up in the recording. If you would like to raise a question, please raise your hand. Myself and officers attending will monitor proceedings with a view to ensuring all requests to speak are seen. In terms of officers attending the meeting today, we have Louise Pringle, Director of Business Operations and Partnerships, Kirsty Stanners, Head of Finance and Chief Financial Officer, Barbara Clark, Chief Accountant, Alison Ballinol, Senior Revenues Manager, Morag Brown, Strategic Senior Services Senior Lead, Michelle Blair, Chief Auditor, Aidan Holligan, Strategic Services Assistant, Linda Hutchison, Clerk to the Committee, and Bethany Mitchell, Assistant Democratic Services Officer. From the External Audit team, I welcome Grace Scanlon from Ernst & Young. Thank you. That takes us on to today's agenda proper. Item 1, apologies for absence. We do have some apologies.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Ireland.
Thank you for that. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are required to give notice of any declarations of interest in respect of today's items in the agenda. Are there any such declarations to be made? No declarations. Okay. Item 3, Chairman's report. For the committee's information, I met with Grace Scanlon from the External Audit team prior to since the last committee meeting. We discussed a range of issues primarily relating to the progress of the audit for the financial statements to 31st March 2025, the drafts of which we will subsequently consider later in the agenda today, and also the impact of the new IFRS accounting standards which impact on those accounts. Further, as you'll be aware, the committee recently conducted its self-evaluation, and it was recommended that all members of the committee be invited to attend that meeting which I attend with the external auditor. So that's usually around August or September, depending on the progress of their audit cycle. And on that basis, all members of the committee will be invited to take part in those discussions, not just myself as chair, but all elected members of the audit committee. That is, of course, subject to the approval of that item on the agenda when we reach it. And finally, I'd like to take this opportunity in today's meeting to note that, as some of you may already be aware, this is Barbara Clark's last attendance at the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Barbara will be retiring from the Council in due course, and I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of us all, Barbara, to thank you for all of your hard work over many, many years. Certainly, in terms of your work in the committee, it's been very much appreciated. I've been an elected member for 3 years, and there's been quite a bit of turnover of staff, so it's sad to see another familiar face leaving us, but I wish you a very long, happy and healthy retirement. That is, of course, contingent on us approving the accounts. Okay, moving on then. Item 4 is the unaudited annual accounts for 24-25, and I'd like to invite the Head of Finance to speak to this item. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to be in a position to present my final set of annual accounts to you today. The report requests that the committee notes and scrutinises the accounts, and so today I would like to take you through 4 main areas to inform you of the Council's current position. In particular, the revenue reserve, the capital spend, the housing revenue account and the management commentary. So firstly, the revenue reserve. I can report that the Council's affairs have been managed within its operational budget, and that departmental savings of £2.5 million were achieved in line with that reported in March. This has enabled a transfer of £1 million to be made to the capital reserve, which will be proposed to Council in September for approval on completion of the audit. This leaves 1.5 million to be added to the non-earmarked reserve, which along with the carried forward balance from last year equates to 2.7% of the 24-25 net revenue budget. This is within the Council's reserve policy to hold a level between 2% and 4%. The savings were mainly due to staff turnover and a reduction in utility costs, as well as a reduction in the anticipated departmental restructuring costs. In addition, the Council received additional income, as well as increased interest earned on temporary investment balances. These were partially offset by increased costs relating to homelessness and temporary accommodation pressures. A list of reserve balances can be found in Note 11 of the accounts on page 81, and a description of the purposes of each reserve can be found on page 21. Moving on to the capital expenditure, a total of over 65 million has been invested during the year across both General Fund and HRA projects, and a high-level split of this is shown in the table in the management commentary, using the same categories as we use for the budget monitoring, and this is on page 24. Thirdly, the housing revenue account. This account finished with a surplus balance of 831,000, mainly due to the pension windfall, taking their overall year-end surplus to just under 2.5 million, details of which can be found in the housing revenue section on pages 120 and 121. Lastly, I would like to draw your attention to the management commentary at the beginning of the document. This outlines the key messages on the objectives and strategy of the Council, as well as the financial performance during 24-25, and also indicates issues and risks which may impact upon the finances of the Council in future. In addition, updates on the digital transformation programme and achievements against the Get to Zero targets are also provided. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on the accounts.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you also to you and Kirsty's teams for all the hard work in getting the accounts to this stage. I would like to open with one question before passing it out to the floor, which is in respect of note 6 on page 52, which is the remuneration report. So you can see there, moving from 24 into the 25 year, there's quite a substantial drop off in the number of teachers who are reported within the various remuneration bands here. Now, that obviously doesn't mean that we've lost so many teachers, but presumably there's a reason why the numbers have moved so much from one year to the next. Could you possibly give some explanation for that, please? Thanks.
Of course. The figure of 440 in 23-24 actually includes the 22-23 backdated pay, which was paid in May of that year, which pushed a lot of people up the scale into a higher bracket. So that's why there's a difference between the 2 years. But I'm sure EY will probably have a wee look at that during the summer.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. So it's because of a one-off exceptional item being included in the remuneration. It's taken some up into that reporting threshold. That makes sense to me. Are there any questions from members of the committee on this item at all, on the accounts? Councillor Edlin.
I have a few questions. I am conscious I'm an amateur at reading accounts, and it may well be that there are simple explanations that I should be aware of that I'm not. And if I take too long of this, could you tell me to put them in writing if necessary? The page 88, I think it is, debtors. I think that's gone up from 2.6 to 3.5 million, which is quite a large increase. Is there an explanation for that, please?
Can I just clarify, Councillor Edlin, is this page 88 of as numbered per the accounts, or page 88 as per the papers?
Find the wrong page.
Page 90, though it is page 86 in the accounts, or page 90 of the PDF.
Yeah, just to be clear on that so people can follow. On the basis that you have found the correct page, is either of you able to pick up on that question? Thank you.
Don't have the detail of that just now, but we can have a look into that and get back to you. Very often it's a timing thing, so you know, maybe the shutters come down on issuing of accounts at a certain time, and it's just purely reflective of that. But we can certainly have a wee look at that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to come in a bit further, if that's okay, Councillor. Whilst the numbers may look sizable, you know, 2.6 million to 3.5. Oh, sorry. While the numbers might look sizable, 2.6 million to 3.5, it's actually not that much of a difference when you look at the size of our overall budget. And from year to year, you would expect to see that number fluctuate a bit because, as Barbara says, it is always about timing in terms of what invoice is paid on what day. So it's not something that would concern us at all, and is pretty normal to see that.
Do you have further questions, Councillor Reddy?
Well, yes, but I think it's probably the same explanation like the fluctuation in short-term deposits. And I noticed the pensions on page 114, I think it is, the investment return has gone from last year from 9.9% down to 3.5% in pensions. Is there an explanation for that?
And that's page 114 of the,
Yes,
the whole
page
papers?
114.
Yeah, so I think those are the assumptions that are referred to.
At least just I just wonder if there's an explanation of that.
Apologies, Councillor Edlin. Is it just is it the principal assumptions that have been used?
Yeah, well, I just wondered how you've gone from 9.9% in last year to 3.5% this year. Seems a big change.
Okay, so it's the whole pension fund is managed by Strathclyde Pension Fund, and we are a member of that fund, and so these questions would have to be directed to them, and we're happy to do so.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Have any further questions,
No, that's
Councillor
fine.
Redland?
Thank you very much for your patience with these.
And Councillor Wallace has questions next.
Yeah, thank you. It's just the annual question about the surpluses that we end up with, 2.5 million, and I know we've had Audit Scotland who, I know we've Audit Scotland who have criticised us in the past about having surpluses, and I recognise it's perhaps around about 1% or so. Just interested to see how does that compare with other authorities? Is that 1% a reasonable figure that we should be happy working with, or is there a strategy somewhere that we can actually ensure that that money will be better budgeted in future years? Thanks.
Kirsty will address this.
Yep, thanks for your question, Councillor. It's less than 1% of the budget, and it's reflective of an underspend overall. And if you're asking how that compares to other councils, well, many other councils are overspending, which is certainly not a position that we would want to be in. To be within 1% accuracy of the budget, I think is a good outcome. However, we were previously just in the budget strategy group, and one of the things that we were talking about there, and I'll reiterate here, is that we are going to be looking over the summer our approach of how we budget for some of our key areas where we do see underspends occurring on an annual basis. So if you think of, for example, staff costs, we always build in an element of turnover in the staff budgets. You know, that's the time it takes for somebody to leave and a new person to be recruited. And it may be that we're a bit optimistic sometimes in terms of how quickly we can get people in. So it means that even though people aim to get somebody in really quickly, the reality is that it's a tough job market out there, and it's a tough job market for local authorities. So it sometimes takes longer than expected. And given that nothing has changed substantially in the recruitment world, we would look at the trends and more accurately reflect them in our budgeting, which would increase the turnover saving and see the staffing budget reduce a little bit. And that would mean that we'd therefore see less of an underspend. However, we don't want to go too far, because being within 1% is very accurate, and we certainly don't want to go too far and end up in an overspend like many other councils.
Yeah, I did just briefly come back to that. I mean, if we're working within 1%, then presumably an overspend of around 1% within that kind of would be acceptable within a kind of budgetary environment. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, it's better to not be overspent. 100%, and I'm always going to say that, and it's good that the financial discipline in this council is so strong, and that hasn't been the situation. We would aim not to be overspent, but I suppose one of the things that Barbara did talk about was our unallocated reserve position, and that is effectively the money we set aside for that circumstance where perhaps some pressure has hit us. If we look back a couple of years with things like the pandemic or the high inflation that happened after the Ukraine invasion, nobody would have foreseen that, and you will have seen many councils having to use some of the reserves to absorb those unexpected pressures. So we might end up, councils might end up in that situation. Within 1%, it's better than 2%, it's not as good as 0, and it's not as good as being really on that budget, which is what we'd want to aim for. But these things do happen, and that's what reserves are there for, but we should always maintain that financial discipline regardless.
If I can ask a supplementary question to that, Kirsty, I'm looking at the foot of page 3 of the papers. So it notes there that the 2.5 million underspend allowed a transfer of £1 million to the capital reserves and the remaining balance to revenue reserves. So that brings us up to basically 2.5% of budgeted net revenue expenditure. So we're talking in terms of a 1% margin, but we'll have reserves for 2.5%, which, I mean, as a policy to try and build that back up, because 2.5% does sound still quite the thin edge of things. Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Between 2 and 4% is what's recommended by CITFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting, and what all councils are striving for. If we went back 10, 15 years, you'd see many councils would be much more at the 4% end of that. And in latter years, we've really been more around the 2%, or sometimes people have dipped below that where they've had no choice but to bridge budget gaps. For us, it is really positive to be able to see us, putting a little bit more into that reserve. It is the prudent thing to do, but it has to be balanced by the fact that we do have projected budget gaps in the years ahead. So it's a really careful decision around saving a bit more for a rainy day while looking at maybe having to make difficult decisions on your budget. And that's why, whilst it is good to increase it a bit, we probably wouldn't see us going right up to 4% when we still have that constraint in our budgets in the next few years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Councillor Wallace has a further question.
Yeah, just following on for what you're saying there. Have CITFA, have they changed their recommendations since the last 10 years to reflect the kind of environment that we're working in?
It's a very interesting point, and no, they haven't. They haven't, yeah. So it's the same as some of the other things we've talked about in Treasury management when we talk about not wanting to spend more than, say, 10% of your budget on loan charges, which is the constraint factor on our capital programme, because the capital grant is very low these days. It's been cut kind of across the years. And CITFA, have that kind of benchmark, but it doesn't appreciate that budgets are under a lot of, they're constrained. So 10% of a constrained budget is very difficult to meet. So no, it hasn't been changed, but it's just probably there's a lot more down at the 2%. And if you actually look in England, where you'll have seen some councils issuing what's called a Section 114 notice, which effectively means they're saying they can't meet their liabilities as they fall due. One of the factors that leads to that decision is when their reserves go below 2%.
Any further questions from members of the committee on the accounts? Provost Montague.
Can I first of all apologise? I was a few minutes late, so I would be excluded from you naming attendees, and also to put on record I don't have any interest to declare. So now to come to this, please. So the audit and scrutiny, it's good to have this item in front of us too, and it gives, let's just look at all the achievements, and that's good, and how we can improve on that. Something that I'm always interested in improving is the supporting principle 3, that's engaging stakeholders effectively, including individual citizens. It's in page 152, and service users. So there's a few points there, and it also goes on to 153, B3.3. That's encouraging collecting the views and experiences of community citizens.
Provost, I'm sorry, but you're addressing the next item on
the
agenda.
Oh, sorry, I'm a wee ahead of myself.
Yeah,
sorry, I'll hold fire.
I'll bring you back in.
Sorry about that.
No, we're still discussing the accounts.
Okay.
I'll bring you in on that
Right.
one, on item 5.
I'm suitably embarrassed, thank you.
No, I'm sorry to embarrass you. Do you have any questions at all on the accounts?
No, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, on the basis that there are no further questions on this item, can I ask for members' approval of the recommendations? Yeah, okay, agreed. Now, moving on to item 5 on the agenda, I would like to invite Morag Brown and Aidan Holligan to speak to this item, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. The report you have in front of you is an important report in terms of how the Council scrutinises our corporate governance arrangements, how we conduct business, engagement communities and the use of the resources. For the first time, this report also includes a draft annual governance statement. This is following a recommendation from the annual audit plan. We'll talk about that a bit later. But first of all, on the code is completed within national guidelines, which are referenced in the report as delivering good governance in local government. It's produced by SIPVA and Solace, and the structure of the code is based on 7 principles. Within that, there's a number of sub-principles and a set of requirements, and that is how the structure of the code that's listed in Annex 1 is organised. There's been no change to the national guidance. So in terms of the process that we use, it's a 2-step process each year. We have a backward look at the code that the committee agreed last year and the improvement actions that we would undertake. So of the backward look of the 12 improvement actions that were listed in the code last year, 7 were completed, and details of those are outlined in paragraph 9. That's the 142, the combined papers number. And the remaining actions are going to be carried forward into the new code, and those are listed in paragraph 10 of the report. Okay, in terms of some examples of some of the actions that are being carried forward, are the reviewing the council standing orders, and also reviewing our community planning governance structures to align to the new Place to Grow strategy that was approved at council back in April. So that is the kind of backward look, and then we then look forward to the new code for 25-26. We do this by completing an assessment against the principles and the requirements in the code. We involve colleagues from across the council and the HSCP, HR, legal, procurement, finance. As you can see from the code, it's very wide-ranging. And they're all involved in assessing the code, identifying evidence that shows that we're complying with the code, and we score using a 3-point grading scale from 1 not compliant, 2 partially compliant and 3 fully compliant. The new code will list examples of some new evidence that we've identified this year to show how we are meeting the requirements of the code. Now, the new evidence the code is so wide-ranging, the new evidence can appear in more than one place in the code. So that's why we've produced that evidence matrix at the back of the table. That's on pages 174 to 188. That's to try and reduce the length of the report. I realise it is very lengthy, but one piece of evidence can apply to more than one principle, and that's why we include that annex there. In terms of our assessment, we have suggested that we are compliant with the majority of areas of the code. With a very small number of areas, we have scored 2 as partially compliant, and that is until the improvement actions have been carried out. So the review of standing orders, the review of the council scheme of administration, and implementing a proportionate response to the new consumer duty. So as well as those carry forward actions, also as a council we're not complacent and we want to continue to improve. So we've identified some new actions, not because we don't think we're compliant, but just think we'll further improve things, and those are listed in paragraph 14, that's page 144 of the papers. So just to sum up then, overall we have identified 9 new actions for your consideration that we think should be proposed in the new code for 25-26. For transparency reasons, and so we keep the public informed of what we're doing, the website, we've already put on the website last year's improvement actions and how we're doing on them, and subject to the committee's approval of the new code, we will then put those actions on the council website. I mentioned at the start, for the first time this year, the annual governance statement is also being considered as part of this report at Annex 2. The statement sets out the council's government framework, a review of its effectiveness and any key actions that are planned in relating to governance. There is an overlap between the code and the actions, so just to highlight that. And I see this was a recommendation from external audit that a separate consideration should be given to the annual governance statement. So in terms of recommendations, the committee is asked to note the progress we've made on last year's code, consider and approve the new code for the year ahead, and recommend to Council the approval of the annual governance statement that's set out in Annex 2 for inclusion in Council's annual accounts. So happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morag. Indeed, the rules that govern the framework within which the Council operates are very important. I'd like to come over to Provost Montague, because obviously you had a question on this item, and also do note that a review of the standing orders of the Council is part of this as well. So I don't know if perhaps you'd like to put your question now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it was page 143, I think it was. Or was it 153? It was 153, sorry. Yes, I know there's a lot of good work goes on and throughout the Council, and about engaging with people, engaging with particular interested and involved groups in the Council. But when it comes to kind of grassroots in neighbourhoods, there seems to be a kind of lack when you speak to people in communities and they don't know what's going on at the Council, or as Councillor Wallace and I attend a community council meeting and people say, didn't know about that, you didn't tell us about that. So it's how do we kind of help people understand what's going on, and that's encouraging them to be involved. How do we get them to give their views? And I'm a great advocate of notice boards within communities as well, to let people know. And those of us who go round doors at election times, you know, it's a great way of listening to people. I know that you can't do that for everybody all the time, but I just wondered, in comparison to other councils, is there any kind of best practice that we can call on as far as engaging directly with people at grassroots level? I know that there can be pop-ups, or, you know, if there are local halls, but it's really just to raise that, yes, we can be proud of what's happened in our community learning development and all the other, but I'm just wondering, is there anything more we could do? Thank you.
Okay, Morag, Aidan. Oh, okay, over to Louise for that one.
Thanks for the question, Provost. We absolutely recognise the importance of local communities and everything you've just said there, and you'll find that there's a lot said about that in Pillar 3 of Place to Grow, which is the community plan and long-term strategy for East Renfrewshire. So very much about trying to make sure we're working with community planning partners, we're working with local communities, and we find lots of different ways to engage people and to get them to play part in their community. I think the absence of a kind of printed press medium now, and the local papers that we used to have gone by the wayside, so that brings different challenges. We're doing more on social media, but we are very aware that that excludes certain people as well, and trying to think through, well, what would that mean and how can we do that differently, and we very much are benchmarking around that. We've also just recently launched WhatsApp channels, just as another way of people being able to engage a bit with the council and find out what's going on. But very much talking to organisations like Voluntary Action East Renfrewshire about notice boards. They do have a kind of shared space online where people can find out what's going on. But again, that's online, so I am aware that there's more than that. We have launched digital notice boards in certain town spaces, and there's Barrhead, there's Clarkson, etc. for ongoing digital notice boards, and we're looking a bit more widely at that as well. In terms of that grassroots piece, you'll be aware that the council has been investing in community capacity building through creation of a community capacity building reserve. So the reserve was first created in 2023, and a further £1.2 million was allocated to that from the Investment for the Future Fund earlier this year as part of budget setting. That's to last a number of years, that reserve. The kinds of things that we're doing in there is some of the community learning and development work, community capacity building out there with groups and working in local communities. That will enable us to go a little bit further than the locality planning areas, which are the most deprived areas locally, which is what we've been funded to do up till now. Let us go a bit further than that. It allows us to make some commitments towards grant making, participatory budgeting, where again those are really great forums for bringing together lots of different small groups actually, who get to meet one another and can then build links between themselves, as well as getting a small amount of funding that will help them with whatever activity they wanted to do. There will be further development and further ongoing engagement around Place to Grow and all the different pillars, and that will continue for a number of years. We're trying to train staff in community engagement right across the council. This shouldn't just be the preserve of the community learning and development team. It's incumbent on all services to be able to do this in the right way. So there'll be further training on that. Trying to work further with voluntary action, East Renfrewshire, to build out their strategic capacity and to be able to help us in that space. And really kind of just fulfilling those broad commitments, those ambitious commitments in Place to Grow. So very much an area we're committed to. Thanks.
Thank you for that response, Louise. Provost, do you have any further questions? Are you quite satisfied with what you've heard? I do have one similar question myself, actually, on page 193, before I pass it out to other members. So I understand that there's a review ongoing of the schemes of administration and delegated functions, and a member officer working group is to be formed to undertake that. Can I ask at this stage what the composition of that group shall be, and if there will be any reporting mechanism back to us at the Audit Committee? Because obviously in terms of the functions that are delegated and how they're administered within the elected side of the council, I think would be of interest to committee members. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, the group met for the first time this week. The composition is that each party and a representative of the independents were invited to attend the meetings, and will continue to do that. There'll be a further meeting in forthcoming weeks, and that paper will be brought, all those papers, the set of them, will be brought back to council, because it's council that sets those, so every member will have a chance to have a look at them at that stage.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I wasn't sure if that was part of the review of the standing orders, which is going on at the same time, because the wording in the report here for the standing order review is that it's underway, but for the scheme of administration delegated functions, the wording suggests that it is to be formed. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Sorry, yeah, I should have been clearer. So there's a few different things at once. There's the standing orders, the scheme of delegation, the scheme of administration, all being done at the same time. So
okay, that makes a lot of sense. Do other members of the committee have any questions on this paper at all? No. Okay, on that basis, we're happy to accept the recommendations? Yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, which is a review of a national external audit report, a review of housing benefit overpayments. Thank you for your attendance, those leaving. For the year 2018-19 to 21-22, I'd like to invite the clerk to introduce this item. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So a copy of the thematic study has already been circulated to Audit and Scrutiny Committee members, and under its specialisation arrangements, the member leading the review of this particular report is Councillor MacDonald. The Director of Business Operations and Partnerships, supported by the Senior Revenues Manager, have provided comments on the report, and they are both attending the meeting today if there's any questions about the feedback that they have provided.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Do members have any questions on this at all? No. Councillor MacDonald?
Sorry, just wanted to pass a few comments on this. Having had a clear view of the report, and the council have comprehensively responded in a manner which I feel is a very positive one to the recommendations that have been put forward. Certainly, the recommendations that have been put forward, just to be clear, have been national wide. So it's recommendations for councils all around the country. East Renfrewshire have already got in place a lot of the recommendations that were made already, so I'm very positive about that. Certainly happy to see that East Renfrewshire perform quite well in comparison to the national average. 19% recovery as opposed to a national average of 13% recovery. So there have been improvements year on year for the last 2 or 3 fiscal years, which are beyond the target of 95%. I think we're at 96 and 98% respectively. But also we've got a very small amount of housing benefit applicants and people that receive it, and compared to the national average, approximately less than 1% for a council out of 1 out of 32 councils, so a very, very low amount. But it's a complex issue because obviously there is transition still going on from housing benefit over to universal credit, and that has been slow nationally. So there are complex issues surrounding the recovery, particularly of housing benefits. So I'm happy to see that there have been improvements year on year, and the council are pushing to improve going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. I appreciate that overview of the report. I mean, from one point of view, I'm looking at the Audit Scotland recommendations on pages 201 and 202. I think also that the council has provided, satisfactory responses to those and shown that we are adhering to what's recommended. On the basis there are no other questions, I'd be happy to note that report and move on. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. The second last item to today's agenda is the Internal Audit Annual Report for 24-25. As this is the report for the overall year, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Michelle and her team for all of their work over the past year, and particularly the help that they provide us in the committee. So please pass back our appreciation to your team if they're not watching the recording. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Michelle to speak to your paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. The annual report is in front of you today, and the primary function of internal audit is to provide an assurance statement to the Council on governance, risk management and internal controls. This duty is formalised in the financial regulations, as is the requirement to produce an annual report. 24-25 is a very good year for audit, and we completed all audits in the plan apart from one which was deferred and approved by the Audit Committee. At the time of writing the covering report, there was 5 audits that were still to be issued. This is now only 2. The work is significantly finished, and we're just awaiting some feedback from the departments before we formally issue them. But there's nothing in these audits that would affect the assurance statement. During the year we issued 24 reports, and satisfactory responses have now been received for all of them where the dates have passed, and all recommendations were accepted by management. Obviously throughout the year, detail of high and medium risk recommendations have been provided to the Audit Committee in the progress reports. And also we did circulate a few reports in full, such as City Deal and all the follow-up reports. In terms of contingency, it's always quite a difficult area to budget for, and we spent 100 days compared to a budgeted 90 days, so we overspent. This covered areas such as council tax refunds process relating to the Aberdeen City fraud, council tax chargebacks, superannuation payments, stores and housing benefit subsidy claim. None of these resulted in financial loss to the council, but recommendations were made where applicable to improve existing processes. In terms of public sector internal audit standards, we generally comply, and this is specifically noted at section 5. The external assessment, which is done every 5 years, was done in January 24, and in Appendix D you've got the recommendations that resulted from that review. There's one that's still outstanding, and it will be implemented within the next few months, if not sooner. In terms of internal audit performance indicators, these are Appendix B. Some of these are reported quarterly to the committee, but there's a few that are only reported annually. I did note that 3 weren't met, and some reasons for this are given at paragraph 6.2. The annual assurance statement itself is in Appendix A, page 213.
and whilst such a statement can provide only reasonable but not absolute assurance against loss, we do place some reliance on a number of sources, such as work done by internal audit, external audit, inspection agencies, and the annual assurances that we get from each director each year. The assurance statement is made subject to all agreed recommendations being implemented by management, and that responsibility obviously rests with the directors. So my conclusion is that reasonable assurance can be put on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and internal control. And I would now ask that you note the contents of the annual report and approve the annual assurance statement for submission to the Council at a later date. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very happy with all that. Also happy with Appendix D of your report also, which is the implementation of the recommendations from the external assessment, all of which are either implemented or scheduled to be implemented. Are there any questions from members of the committee? I have Councillor Wallace, then Councillor Edlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did just to congratulate the internal audit, the number of audits achieved against planned, best over 3 years, very good. Interested to know what how you managed to achieve that against previous years. But the second one also is the cost of internal audit per productive day significantly less than it was in previous years. So also if you could maybe comment on that, thanks.
In terms of the number of audits that we completed, obviously we're at full complement now, and that's probably the main reason that we've got full team. In terms of the annual cost, or the cost per productive day, it can fluctuate a bit because the number of productive days is a better percentage when we've got a full team, and the overall costs we do have. It's mainly staff costs, but we do also get recharges from other services as well, and that doesn't necessarily reflect the number of people. It's sometimes still quite high, even if we've got fewer people. So that's probably why the number has come down this year.
So, sorry, just to understand then, so have we less recharges from other departments? Is that really what? No?
No, we've probably got similar recharges from other departments, but we're dividing it by a higher number of productive days, right, because we've got more staff.
No further questions, Councillor Wallace? No. Okay, in which case can I move on to Councillor Edlin.
I'd add my congratulations to what Councillor Wallace said. Could I refer to table 1, page 209, relating to audit work and the planned days? I'm surprised to see you anticipated the work planned for the audit of IJB, which is a huge organisation in East Renfrewshire. It was planned at 15 days and only took 4 days, a huge variance. Can you explain that? It seems very surprising. Either that or there's been a huge factor of efficiency that nobody could have anticipated.
Okay. Different councils treat this slightly differently. So we do a lot more work on HSCP audits, which some other councils classify as IJB. So the days that I've got in against IJB are specifically for just the actual IJB itself. In addition to that, we also do work on HSCP audits, such as payment to care providers. So this issue has been raised by the IJB itself a couple of years ago, and I did get comparisons from other councils, and we were spending similar days in total over HSCP and IJB to other councils. It's just we maybe show it slightly differently.
Okay.
You happy with that, Councillor Edlin? Any further questions?
Beyond my scope of understanding, it seems a reasonable explanation. You're saying, as I understand it, that it's dealt with separate. HSCP and IJB are dealt with separately, and this is just IJB, which is a relatively small part of HSCP-IJB complex. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, so for example, if you look at the the annual plan. We did other audits in HSCP, such as payment to care providers, Bonneton House, and we do like the resource centres, etc. So it's covered, but not under. It's not classified as IGB. It's just under the council audits.
Can I tag a question on to the end of that then? Because obviously the IGB, as I understand it, has a performance and audit committee, which is quite distinct from this one. And there is a member who is on that performance and audit committee, I believe. I can't remember who it may be, but is there perhaps greater scope for understanding what their function is, or is that not relevant to us?
I don't know if I could comment on that, but yes, there is. I think it's Councillor Pragnell that chairs it at the moment. And
I think there is a deputy as well.
Yeah, but I couldn't.
But you sit on the committee?
I think you're co-opted onto the...
I'm co-opted onto
Yes.
it. I believe that Councillor Wallace, I think, was also involved. Were you involved?
I was involved in the sense that if you couldn't
Yeah,
make it,
yeah.
you would inform me
Yeah.
and I would deputise for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just illustrating the point that the reason why there's very few hours input from us is because there is a separate function for oversight and audit of the IGB and the HSCP's activities. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I think their meeting is next week, next Wednesday. And they do actually consider all council-related audits that touch on HSCP, and that they do table them fully.
Okay, that's very helpful. Are there any further questions on this paper at all, on any other items? No, I'd be quite happy to accept the two recommendations, therefore, regarding the contents of the report and the annual statement of assurance. Yes? Okay, thank you so much. That moves us on to item 8, which is the outcome of the committee's self-assessment, and I'd like to invite the clerk to present this item. Thanks.
Well, I know that members of the committee are very familiar with this piece of work because you were involved in discussions on it. So I'm just proposing to say a few comments. So this report refers to the outcome of the committee's most recent self-assessment, which was undertaken during the past few months, as you know. It comments on the value of such exercises, the approach taken and the conclusions reached and comments made, recommendations, etc. More specifically, through feedback from and related discussions with members of the committee and a few others, a list of observations was drawn up and recommendations have been made, linked to which an action plan has been prepared, which the committee is being asked to approve today. Some actions, such as the one concerning queries from committee members on issues before and at meetings, will come into effect effectually immediately. Others will take a little longer to complete towards the end of the annual year, but they'll all be pursued as appropriate. Some of them are linked to other work that's been done, so some of them have been timed to align with the review of the standing orders and scheme of delegated functions, etc. As the report reflects, it's intended to review progress with implementation of the actions in due course, and also in due course, nearer the time of the 2027 local government elections, it's intended to carry out a further self-evaluation. So the recommendations are there before you. You've been asked to approve the recommendations and observations in the report, and note that further will be done to review progress in due course, and that a further self-assessment will be done end of 26, start of 27.
Which will be here before you know it. Are there any
Thank you.
are there any questions on this item? I have Councillor Gordon Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Quite often this kind of self-assessment is a bit of navel-gazing that goes on. I'm absolutely curious with the perhaps head of finance, with your experience in many different types of organisations, many different types of setups. You've been observing, I'm sure, how the Audit and Scrutiny Committee perform and our duties, etc. I'd be interested to know your own observations on how we're performing. Thank
you. Through this self-assessment process, it was very thorough indeed. and a lot of effort was obviously put in by members of the committee. So I think the council and the members have definitely fulfilled the requirement for the self-assessment, and it's good to see an action plan coming out. But I don't think it should take away from the fact that in the majority of areas, the committee is compliant with best practice. I think that there can sometimes be times where guidance is created by bodies who perhaps aren't as familiar with the reality of council operations, especially smaller councils. So sometimes what they say is best practice is just not feasible in a smaller council, and it would be difficult for councils to try to meet that standard without it becoming onerous on members and officers. So I think what we do in this council, given the size, is actually achieving best practice. You should be very proud that this is what we do. We get good questions at the meetings, and the meetings are well organised. So compared to what I've seen elsewhere, I think we're doing pretty well.
Any further questions? I particularly liked the part of the report that said that the committee meetings are well chaired. I very much appreciated that. In seriousness, I think I would reflect on point 20 on page 240, which is basically regarding requests for further information, questions or feedback, and to reiterate, as has been said by officers on the committee previously, forward notice of those questions or any items that you may be seeking feedback on in advance of the meeting is appreciated, particularly when you think some of the areas we examine are very complex in nature. The accounts, for example, run to hundreds of pages in length, and just a little forward notice will probably increase the likelihood of a successful response and a more comprehensive response in the committee. So I would just simply draw attention to that recommendation on page 240. Are there any further questions at all from members? Councillor Wallace.
Just one last observation. I appreciate the self-gratulation of the chair there. Member, perhaps we want to refer to the clerk and the work that she actually puts into it, and I think has for many years done so. So thank you to the clerk, I think. Thanks.
I will absolutely second that, particularly with this exercise. It's been very extensive and a lot of communications from members, so my appreciation also. Thank you, Linda. Are there any further questions at all on this item? No? Okay. I'll be happy to accept. And with that, that concludes this afternoon's meeting. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you so much.